It's crazy that we use fake money. You would think in this modern day and age, with all of its technology and sophistication and highly educated MBAs and PhDs, and you'd think we have all this stuff figured out, right? How to run a civilization. Well, we're using, we spend a large portion of our lives working hard to obtain money. And, it's money is a way to measure wealth, but it's not really wealth itself. A perfect example is like if you were to bury $1 million in cash 100 years ago and dig it up now, it's not going to be worth nearly what it was. Now, people can grasp that. They grasp that in their heads pretty easily. But I don't think the implications and the overall picture really sinks into their heads. So I'd say when I first started self-educating myself in finance around 2015, discovering that inflation is guaranteed over time because our currency is not backed by anything anymore. So ever since 1971 in the United States, Nixon took us off the gold standard, and that takes the cap away from the government overspending. So without a gold standard, if the federal government wants money for war, if they want money for a social program, they can just they don't need the consent of a taxed population. They can just run the printing press, and the inflationary effect is so delayed that the masses don't know any of the wiser. And so I actually 10 years ago when I discovered that inflation was guaranteed over time because of government fiscal irresponsibility, overspending, the political, it's just not viable to just honestly raise taxes for the amount of government spending we actually have. Like when you think about the size of our like the US government, how much federal spending there is, I bet you half the spending in the economy is from the public sector. So you can't even say this is a capitalistic society, but a lot of people are going to blame capitalism for the amalgamations and the corruption in our economy, but it's really the Federal Reserve and the fact that we're using fake money. If you look at the wealth gap, and I think the wealth gap is a subject that is going to be crucial to ever unifying the left and the right. See, if everything went perfect for my main projects right now in 5-10 years, I would contemplate, how can you unify the people, because it's clear to me right now that the masses are being divided more than ever. The left thinks the right is the devil. The right thinks the left is the devil. At the end of the day, though, the government still gets in, so we lose. But they've been more successful than ever at keeping people's attention and faith in that part of the system. Um, they want people voting, and they want people to have false beliefs in something that won't actually get them anywhere. Um, the wealth gap growing is eventually going to lead to a revolution. Now they have people so comfortable, so complacent, especially people. It's ironic. The more power you have to make change, the more you're indirectly benefiting from the system, even if you don't comprehend it. So say you're a upper middle class family in the suburbs, and your house has gone up sixfold in price this century, you think you're benefiting from it. You have no idea about the Federal Reserve. You have no idea about even business. But you're better off because of their policies, even though you can't even grasp them. And this happens, this the degree at which that applies more the wealthier you are. So, if you're worth $100 million, you could actually make change in this world. You could almost create an army. I mean, and but those people who are most able to create change, to disrupt the system, have the least incentive to do so, because the system has geniusly been designed where the more you have, the more you have to lose from a revolution. So even if even if your ideals and ethics are aligned with someone who's uber wealthy, they're going to be hesitant to support the cause. Because why would they want anything to change? Why would they want any the system to change? I mean, if you're comfortable, like, the people in power are going to do everything to keep kicking the can down the road, to not they don't want any substantive change. They're going to, like, pretend to change little bits here and there, like all it for an example on the right wing is you could just ban transgenders from women's sports, and even though they've taken 100 rights away from you in the last 20 years, they'll throw you this one bone, and now you're complacent. Now you got faith in the system again. You're an obedient taxpayer again. You'll go to work the next day, and because you have faith in the system again. The faith in the system's been reinforced, even though they've taken you 200 steps backward, one step forward, and they want you focusing on the one step forward. And so the implications of us using fake money, they're endless. I mean, once you've wrapped your mind around this concept, are houses really worth what they're worth? Or has the dollar just gone down? Is the stock market, the Dow just hit 50,000. Is the Dow really that valuable? Or maybe we're measuring it in a unit of measurement that is constantly being depreciated. Imagine, what if you told someone to build a house, but the length that an inch went from this big to this, but you told them to use the same blueprints that it was when the inch was bigger? And that's where you have, like, all these these analysts and people with MBAs, fancy degrees, these talking heads on TV. They're all referring to these statistics that mean nothing because they're assuming the unit of measurement stays the same when it doesn't. And so my day job at the moment is I help do people's taxes. And all the time, we're always proforming the basic blueprint of a client's tax return from the previous year, because usually it's a repeating client that you did the prior year, and most of the time you can expect sources of income or deductions that happened in the prior year to happen again in the new year, and often they're of similar values. They might have gone up a bit or down a little bit, but usually they're similar values from the prior year. Say you're paying property taxes. It's usually a similar, maybe slightly increased amount from the prior year. Say you get a W-2. Say you have interest from a bank account. All these figures are usually somewhat similar to the prior year. Now, of course, things change all the time. People move money around, but what you're expecting to happen is for someone to have a W-2 from the same employer with maybe 10% higher in the wages field. Now, very often you'll see someone get like $10,000 in interest income from some note say it'll be like just 10 grand. Like, say you'll see a client get 10 grand in income from some source, whatever it is, right? It could be anything. Say even it's like 50 grand a year from Social Security. They get that same number the next year. The number looks the same. And they think they made the same amount of money. But they'll say inflation is 2, 3, 4%, some single digit amount. But how much did prices really go up? You know, how much more is insurance from last year? How much more is going to go to get a cheeseburger? How much is an education versus a year ago? Like, the prices of things have gone up way more than the supposed CPI says. So if prices went up 20% in a year and you made the same 10 grand a year as you did the prior year, you're less well off. You're less wealthy. But 99% of people, that will go over their head. You could tell them that. You could shake them. And look, you're losing money. You're not making the money you thought you were. And they'll kind of just like pretend to understand what you're saying and nod their head and then go to do nothing about it. And the investment implications, like when you wrap your mind around the fact that the dollars are guaranteed to lose value, the investment implications are kind of profound because you realize that bonds are probably a scam, because when you buy a bond, you're basically a source of cash for an entity. And the best thing that can happen is you get paid back your principal plus interest, and the interest is never going to be enough to counteract inflation. So you're taking on the risk of loaning someone money to be guaranteed to lose money. And this is why gold and silver are going up so much. I mean, all the money that people have in bonds because they want money to be safe should actually be in gold and silver. And you could see in the last 10, 20, 30 years that they would have been much better off had they just bought gold and silver. And a large part of the system relies on the government all the Western governments that are overly indebted need people to buy their bonds. Otherwise, they don't have cash to run their governments. And so, increasingly, investors who are self-interested and looking to maximize their own returns and wealth there's going to be less and less bond buyers that, through their own judgment and capital are going to choose bonds. At least in a stock, you could get a 10 bagger and 10 times your money. Now, yeah, you could lose money, but the best case scenario in a stock is far superior to the best case scenario in a bond. Like, the interest you get in the bond isn't even going to make up for the inflation. So why are you loaning the money in the first place? And so the investment implications, though, are you realize that you need to put your cash in something. Like, whatever cash you have, no matter whether you have $1,000 extra or $1 billion extra, that money normally in a normal capitalistic gold standard society, you would want your money working. You would want your money invested, growing businesses, and indirectly hiring people to make you money. However, the system being designed the way it is now, you're double's the wrong word. There's extra incentive to put your money to work and not save it, because normally your savings would just be these gold coins in a vault and they wouldn't lose value. But there is no gold coins in a vault. It's just a digital number on a hard drive. And so that means that, like, I realized that I had to put my money to work. Like, if you have cash and you're trying to build wealth, you can't just keep it in cash. You either need to, you're forced, the system forces you to take a risk. Because not taking a risk is a guaranteed loss. You keep that money in the bank, you buy bonds, you're guaranteed to fall behind. So the system, once you understand the system, you're basically, money is merely a sort of fuel for more money. It's not really money itself. Its currency is kind of like this transfer mechanism, how wealth is like measured and moved. Currency and cash are how money is measured and moved, but it's not how it's grown. And so, like, you even look at real estate investors, they didn't have their money in cash. A lot of people who built an empire in real estate got way wealthier than they should have or deserved to because they had the tailwind of inflation. Like, basically anyone with bonds or a savings account is subsidizing asset owners, because as the money gets printed and the inflation happens, valuable assets are pushed up in price while everyone's savings and bonds and wages are depreciated. Same with their fixed income assets like Social Security, pensions. Like, you wonder, like, man, we have $38 trillion in debt. How are we going to pay that off? We're going to inflate it away. So eventually that debt's going to get to 50 trillion. 50 trillion is a lot of money. It's more than the human mind can even fathom. But whatever the amount is, we can make it easier to make the payments by making the dollar worth less. And that has been the plan for 55 years, and will, for all the evidence is there that they're hoping this can continue for another 55 years. You know, like, the wealth gap will keep growing. It's just a question of, does a revolution ever happen? Like, they're going to keep kicking the can down the road with no major policies, like, at least, like, no policies that's going to make us wealthier or liberate us. Everything is going to be a show to give us bread, like bits of crumbs, as the wealthier just get wealthier and wealthier, more powerful and powerful, and the young generations, unless they have wealth in their family, are just completely screwed. And if a revolution never happens, this will just keep continuing. And so, yeah, 10 years ago when I figured all this stuff out, like, my first investments were into gold. So in 2015, I started wrapping my mind around this stuff. And, like, I was studying this stuff, like, over the weekend. And, like, Monday hit, and I was rushing to the coin shop. Like, I know it's so irrational and silly in hindsight, because inflation doesn't happen overnight. It happens like you can keep a bunch of cash in a bank account for 3 months and it didn't cost you anything. Like, the money's not going to lose value that quickly. It takes years. But here I was, like, as soon as my mind, like, grasped it, I was just, like, rushing to the coin shop, because this hard-earned money, like, my money that, you know, to me, maybe I've just been working the wrong jobs, but I dislike working so much that I don't want the fruits of my labor to be wasted. Like, and I'm trying to retire as soon as possible because I dislike, it's not that I dislike work. I dislike having to take orders, and I dislike relying on another person to be economically relevant. And I think subconsciously I dislike being reminded of how I've short-sold myself. Like, when I'm at work, I think subconsciously I'm angry at myself because I know I put myself in that situation. Like, had I took a different path 10, 15 years ago and just believed in my own creativity and ambition and abilities and intellect, I could be self-employed and have my own gigs going, and I wouldn't need this employer. And I think that subconsciously that's why it bothers me so much. But um, like I knew that in order to escape that as soon as possible, I had to be in the best investor possible. Um, and so I think at the time I ran into a guy named Peter Schiff, and he talked a lot about how the stock market really hasn't been doing as well this century as they claim because it's priced in dollars. Like if you go to pricedingold.com, you can see how the Dow Jones and S&P actually peaked around 2000 when you price it in gold. And it's interesting is like that makes total sense when you look at the world around you and you look at like we've been in a recession since 2000. You know, the arts have been in a downhill. The middle class has been getting crushed. Um, like your average worker, like rent for the average person has been harder and harder to afford since 2000. It's really hard to describe all the implications. But the idea is that just like the Matrix movie suggested, like our peak of civilization was around 2000. And a lot of the wealth that has supposedly been created since then is inflation. Um, we point to like the stock market and say, look how much wealth has been created. We look at like real estate prices and let's say like, look how much wealth has been created, but no wealth was really created. It was just transferred. Like if you price it in gold and not dollars, like only these tech monopolistic companies actually became more valuable, and some other exceptions like, you know, McDonald's or Walmart. But you had to have a very thriving business to actually like to actually build wealth more than just holding it in gold would be. And you know, the fact that we use fake money, our lack of a gold standard, it's the main cause of the growing wealth inequality, and that has to create a revolution someday. I mean, it's either that or they permanently are able to create an underclass. If they can keep the underclass comfortable forever, like what if they just plugged everyone into like a virtual reality machine, kind of like the Matrix? Then there would never be a revolution. Because it really comes down to how comfortable we are. Like, um, but I do think that if there is ever a chance at a revolution, at someone taking power who actually cares about the average person, the main issue that will unite the country, unite the right and the left, is the growing wealth inequality. Um, whether you're a farmer or a trucker from the South who voted for Trump, or you're a broke college student in San Francisco, you may disagree on pretty much everything, but the one thing you'll agree on is the wealth gap growing and how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and that's a problem. And one of the things that has me so suspicious about every supposed leader put out there in front of us today is no one's putting in any effort to unify the country. It's like in the past we would have disagreements. Like you're never going to agree with someone on everything. I mean, we change our views every so few years, every decade or two. We have different views. So why are we thinking everyone should have the same views as us when we don't even have the same views as ourselves in the past? So it's madness to think that everyone is going to share all the same views. Now we should be discussing things openly and trying to come to, you know, the best solution possible for the best amount of people, but there's no attempt to unify. You know, you look on the left, there's no attempt to understand where the right's coming from. The right makes no attempt to understand where the left's coming from. Um, it's just, and that's how you kind of know, like, they're all on the same side. Like, they've been given a script. Like, the goal is to divide the people. Don't ever, like it's like WWE, right? Where they're told, don't ever appear in public with the other side, because we need to keep the show going that we're enemies, but we're just hired spokespersons by this unseen power structure to make the masses think they have representatives and hope. But really, it's just this merchant class behind the scenes that has bought the government, bought everyone off to make everyone think they have a say. But really, everything is just based on the god of money. No nations really matter anymore. And everyone wakes up and lives their whole lives for the god of money, while they just print it like it's nothing. And so something you'll notice after a while is that the media never blames the cause of all this, which is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the can of worms, right? That is, the media will never attack the Federal Reserve. What's being done now is Trump is putting in all these policies that make life harder on the average American. And the economy might do well in spite of the government. That's something that's hard to predict, is the economy, there's always these sections of the economy that are doing really well in spite of what the government is trying to do. And so that's always making, throwing wrenches in things. And so there will be thriving businesses. There's always going to be some thriving business out there. There's always going to be some people doing well in spite of the government. But you'll notice the media never blames the Fed. The left wing will never blame the Fed. The right wing will never blame the Fed. The mainstream media will never blame it. Not even academia. I remember when I was getting my college degree, in my finance course, and they were trying to justify why we need 2% inflation a year. Like, they try to convince you that if there was no inflation, we would never buy anything, which is complete BS, because I could get a cheaper and better smartphone if I waited a year, but I don't. Why? Because I want it now. But this is a lie. They have to justify some inflation, because the system runs on inflation. So they can't hide it all. They're going to try to hide like 80% of it, pretend it's not there. That they have to acknowledge that it exists, because that would just be too much. To acknowledge, for them to say our money never loses value would be too much. So they admit that over time it loses value. They just say it's only 2% a year. But really, there's no reason it needs to lose any value. Like if we run a gold standard. But the rich and the government benefit from fiat money and the lack of a gold standard, which is why things are the way they are. Like if both the government and the rich benefit from something, it's probably going to exist, because who's going to stop it? So anyway, the implications are just profound. The fact that we use fake money, I mean, it keeps people working longer. It keeps destroying people's savings and wealth and wages, so that they are in a permanent underclass, a working class. It makes it so that it's so convoluted and confusing that even well-intentioned teachers or well-intended parents, well-intended mentors, they can't help you navigate through this, because they haven't even grasped it themselves. And a big reason why well-intentioned people can't grasp this stuff is these concepts are so malevolent, so evil in a way, so like it's such a scheme. This isn't how most people are trained to think. They're too good for this level of deception. And it's why they can't really grasp it or relate to the thinking, is because most people, I don't think subconsciously they want to admit that we're being ruled by such malevolence. I think that's what keeps people's faith in the system is the emotional strength, emotional resilience. That doesn't even seem right. The cold, harsh truth is too ugly for most people to face. And whether it was religion in the past or government now, it seems like people want an outside entity to come save them. Because the truth is that we come into this world and we'll probably leave this world alone. And the truth is a lot harsher than people want to admit. People want a mother, father figure to protect them and to give them answers. And I think that you're supposed to grow out of that. When you become an adult, you're supposed to grow out of that. But most people never do. And I think the powers that be understand psychology. They understand how most people are. And most people have these abandonment issues from either their father or their mother, and they want some big daddy or mommy figure to come save them and tell them everything's going to be okay. But they don't want to admit that outside of your family, and even not even them sometimes, like most people don't care about you, the government doesn't care about you. And a lot of people never want to admit that. They want to just think they can vote their side in. And I think that just lets them sleep at night. But I'm not interested in short-term comfort. Like, that's not going to get me happiness, and it's not going to liberate my family into a new economic class. And that isn't about greed. It's about survival. If you don't have enough means, the historian in me, I'm an historian, if you don't have means, you're just waiting for the next disaster or the next insane government to just bat you around like you're nothing. And that, the desire to protect yourself transcends politics. You know, I mean, you can't debate the politics if you're dead. Like, so anyway, if you're still listening to this, I really appreciate it. And please like and subscribe, because it gives me the motivation to continue, which I really need right now. And any bit of encouragement or advice you can give me is greatly appreciated. Yeah, I wanted to talk about how crazy it is that we use fake money, the implications of it, why it's a big deal, and how I do think that someday it could be what unifies this egregiously divided nation.